Good evening. The pace at which the 5G debates are getting increasingly shrill shows how big tech is. 4 days ago, the UK House of Commons Defence Select Committee said that, and I quote, the UK government has had to balance technical considerations with wider geopolitical considerations when formulating its 5G policy. What should have been a simple trade and investment issue has now become a major debate around foreign affairs, international relations, and technology in general, and China and Huawei in particular. The dangers China poses to the world, such as bullying countries around the South China Sea, attacking India at Ladakh, and creating tensions around most of its borders, is now being seen to be accentuated by its tech intrusions of apps and equipment. Over the next 45 minutes, this session hopes to explore these themes and decode what's going on. I will first start with Ambassador Feakin. Last year, Australia initiated the global ban on Chinese equipment in 5G and all critical infrastructure from China. This is a courageous move. You didn't know whether other countries would support you. You didn't know whether US will support you. Do you still see Chinese firms in general and Huawei in particular a danger to the national security of Australian citizens?
About such an important issue as 5G and this kind of broader tech environment that we currently find ourselves in. If I may, just to recap, kind of Australian position, it's not a universal ban on everything Chinese, far from it. China is still one of our key trading partners, and we still have a tremendous amount of exchange that goes on. In terms of our 5G decision, if you like, we were one of the early movers in this sense, if not the first. In August 2018, we made a decision to ban high-risk vendors. It's country agnostic, it's vendor agnostic, but there are certain key requirements in our telecommunications sector that they have to take into consideration national security elements of which providers they use to build their 5G architecture. And quite simply, in terms of the decision process of government guidelines that we put down, it was about the fact that 5G being one of the fundamentally most important infrastructure investments that we would make as a country, that we just felt there were certain key risks that had to be addressed for a vendor to be allowed to build that network and then provide the more mature 5G network that most of us would be thinking about. 5G provides that connectivity for driverless cars, autonomous vehicles and the like, which all of us immediately think about when we think about, the Internet of Things and 5-10 years down the track. And for us, essentially, when we looked at the kind of risk mitigations that could potentially put in place from a traditional cybersecurity point of view, essentially none of them held up. And it was the fact that you can't really separate a core and a periphery in a 5G network. The whole thing is basically a ubiquitous network, so you can't really section it off in the same way. So therefore, to bring a high-risk vendor in would essentially, in our view, be akin to giving away the keys to your car. It makes life very, very difficult. And I know we'll get onto this in a moment, and then I'll pass over back to you, Chair. But one of the key considerations here is the cost consideration. And it's very easy to think that cost should be, the key indicator for most countries in the way they make those choices. But if you like, it's a false economy. Because if you want to secure your future economy and you have no faith in the vendor that you are actually using to provide the 5G architecture which will underpin that future economy, well, essentially, you are going to lose out because you will put so much money into trying to secure a network which is, to be frank, unsecurable if you put a high-risk vendor into the backbone of it, that you will undermine all the economic benefits you may have had at the beginning of that journey. So there's so much more to talk about in terms of the decision process and where it leaves us, but if you like, that gives you a little bit of a historical context to the decision-making that we went through.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll quickly rush to Europe with Chair Albrycht. Europe is trapped between China and the US, between economic interests and strategic interests. The US wants Europe to ban Huawei and Chinese equipment. The UK has done so selectively by end of 2027. I don't know how effective that ban is going to be, because by which time it is expected that 6G will be commercially available. So effectively, it's not a ban at all. Germany and France are still thinking about the ban. Italy has had a different approach. Its company TIM, which is Telecom Italia, has left Chinese firms out of its tender in Italy as well as in Brazil. How do you see this play out across the rest of Europe?
Thank you for having me at this very important conference, and I particularly also value our partnership with ORF. I think that we are kind of like-minded on different aspects of cybersecurity as well as 5G deployment. So from my European and transatlantic perspective, related to the fact that my country, Poland, is both a member of EU and NATO, I can in fact say that we are more and more closing to missing the connection with China in terms of 5G network, since, as you said, many of EU and NATO countries, as well as both organizations themselves, are underlining the need to deploy this transformational technology, having a deep security consideration, including political and geopolitical ones, and having security, in fact, as the imperative. And I'm more than aware that 5G should be seen also in Europe as soft and hard power of our times, and that China is actually aware of that too. So we are still, and you also said it, in this kind of the moment when 5G is affecting to some extent our relations with both within both the European Union and alliance, particularly with the US pushing NATO members to impose outright ban on the Chinese provider, which is an important economic partner for many EU countries. And at the beginning of the 5G debate here in Europe, we were indeed kind of losing the connection within EU and NATO. But now I have this feeling that we are moving towards getting connected again and like-minded. And I think that we are accepted the fact that we made mistakes by favoring the commercial interest over security and defense one at the beginning. Now EU countries are maybe still not of one mind in terms of how to classify the Chinese provider, and it's being classified as a high-risk vendor, whether to impose an outright ban or just strict technical security measures. And so that is why European Commission issued, together with EU member states, a risk assessment and recommendations, so the EU 5G toolbox. And now many EU countries are adopting some regulations which will address the way how they are going to impose these recommendations. But we are at least like-minded within the EU that we need to extend or broaden the concept of strategic autonomy to comprise various policy sectors, such as also telecommunication. And EU and member states are also looking closely at the issue of the security of 5G supply chain, which was affected not only by COVID-19, but most of all by US sanctions imposed on Huawei and its suppliers. So these all measures which we are having in mind are on the civilian dimension of 5G technology, but within the NATO, we are also looking closely at defense and military dimension, because there is also an important role to play by NATO in that discussion. And in fact, NATO is playing this part with underlining the strategic importance of having resilient telecommunication infrastructure. NATO has strengthened its reliance guidelines for telecommunications, including 5G. My personal opinion is that NATO should actually also consider issuing one security 5G standard. So definitely, for all the time while managing the 5G risk, we should also keep in mind that any equipment is vulnerable and can fail or be compromised by adversaries or be affected by human error, and we should adopt the strategy accordingly. So having also this cybersecurity consideration in mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll come last to Subrata now, to India. We have Chinese on our borders. There is talk of war. India has banned 224 Chinese apps already. But it has still not touched Huawei or Chinese firms in 5G equipment yet. They are still eligible to bid for 5G as and when India opens the tenders. What do you think is going on? Why is India lagging the ban curve? Why is India not banning Huawei today?
Thanks, Gautam. Thanks, Varas. See, as a policy, Ericsson does not comment on national 5G security decisions made by different countries, nor do we comment on our competitors. But our global experience has shown us so far that nations that have made such decisions have not made it for or against a specific vendor for trade or industrial policy purposes, but as national security decisions. And in all such countries where such determinations have been made, Ericsson has been designated as a trusted and secure vendor. On your question, first I will say that for India, we need to first fix our spectrum roadmap. I think before that's an area where we need to fill the gap. The spectrum part is still not clear in terms of our 5G. So once we address the spectrum piece in terms of both in the 3.5 gigahertz, in the millimeter wave, and in the backhaul, then I think we'll be able to look at an efficient 5G rollout. On your question specifically on security, what we are seeing is that possibly 5G is the most secure in terms of generation, if you see, is possibly the most secure mobile network generation ever. And this security has been built in from the start as part of the standardization process. And this is crucial in 5G because it will be part of your critical infrastructure, facilitating the digitization, automation, connectivity to machines, IoT devices, transport, almost all sectors of your economy. And with billions of connected devices and new types of applications, the networks need to be far more resilient, secure, and better able to protect the individual's right to privacy. And that's where, if you see, the security is inbuilt within, and it is across, as we call it, four pillars. It is not restricted at one. It is right. It starts from the standards. It goes on to the products and development process. Then it goes to the network deployments and operational security. And ensuring the protection of end user requires that all these four layers are properly and adequately addressed to achieve the targeted security status.
Thank you, Subrata. I now finally come to Professor Chai. Welcome. China has generally been missing. It's the big elephant in the room, but it has largely been missing in most of the rooms during which the 5G debates were happening. And you have several, all eyes are on you right now. So I'll just give you a little background. The US followed Australia. It's gone ahead of Australia, built a technical narrative around 5G security and banned Huawei. On the other side, China keeps saying, show us the evidence. Where does it show that we are not a dependable vendor? Sitting in China and generally missing from the discussion, how do you see this US-China binary play out? Do you think China, by weaponizing everything, attacking everyone all at the same time, has invited this backlash in the tech domain? Do you think its non-tech behavior is impacting the technological, the way countries are reacting to its technological ingress?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very pleased to be able to join this session. I really think that in the world there are a lot of debate about U.S.-China binary, and I think it is it is maybe a lot more than the technical issues between U.S. and China. And so there, I have heard what the previous panelists have said. It means that Huawei is kind of a threat, national security threat, as a preposition. And I think this is, first of all, not really correct. I will talk about that later. But you mentioned U.S.-China binary. I think that, firstly, it is competition in high tech, of course, because as everybody has said, 5G is very important for the future national development, for the economy, for the national security, society, in whatever aspect. Then, secondly, I think that for the United States, there is also another consideration behind the 5G competition with China, because this means that their companies, their enterprises might have the disadvantage in this market if it's left to Huawei and Chinese companies to compete in the United States market. And thirdly, I think this is a kind of competition of national security capability, because as we all know that these 5G companies, maybe they have the ability to collect data or intelligence information, but not necessarily will do that, but the capabilities there. And for China and the U.S. Binary, I also think the fourth competition is about the political idea and even the governance model competition between U.S. and China, as we see a lot of, even in this pandemic. So there are some debate about which model, which system is better. And finally, and the most important thing, I think, the U.S.-China binary on over 5G also means that the competition for international order. I think this is very much important. And about Huawei if Huawei is a threat, if it is equal to national security threat, I really doubt about it, because as the introduction of this panel mentions that Huawei has the cozy relationship with the CCP, but I have to say that this is really misunderstanding, because Huawei is in fact not a state-owned enterprise, but a private enterprise. And also Huawei, also in Huawei's own statement, they say we hope to reduce the interference of political actors on 5G, R&D and deployment, etc. And also, as I know that Chinese enterprises operate in all countries in accordance with the laws and regulations of those countries. And the most important is that there's no confirmed evidence for Huawei's national security threat. So I think that, threat, there are two kinds. One kind is this kind of from your brain. It is a kind of subjective feelings. And the other is based on the objective facts. So right now on for Huawei's situation, I think that the ability, if we talk about ability, many other countries, every enterprises from each country, they probably other 5G companies also has the ability. I will leave it here and maybe later.
Yeah, so I'm tempted to move on as per the plan, but I want to just cross-question you once more. So
Yes.
you mentioned that Huawei wants to go back now, and it will not support the Chinese state when it is asking for intelligence. Then by that, if that is a fact, then it will be violating the Chinese law, which is the national intelligence law, particularly Articles 7, 9, Articles 12, and Article 14. These 4 articles of the Chinese national intelligence law of China would be breached if Huawei does not share, does not collect intelligence, does not transmit that intelligence back to China. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I have to say, if you see that, we also have some other, regulations, and Chinese government also, recently Chinese also give a global initiative on data security. I'm not sure if you have have learned about that. This is actually was released in September. Well, September, this September, and actually in that initiative Chinese proposed, it says that a lot of, for example, that let me check. States should respect the sovereignty, jurisdiction, and governance of data of other countries, and shall not obtain data located in other countries through companies or individuals without other states' permission, etc. There are several other clauses that all talk about, I think this, perhaps you should look at it, because this is the most recent one.
Thank you.
Right, yeah.
Thank you. I'll come to Ambassador Feakin again. We've heard what Professor Kai said, Ambassador Feakin. If indeed Huawei equipment or ZTE equipment is safe and non-intrusive, do you think China is being made a victim? Is there a trust factor with China? Do you agree with Professor Kai that?
I think there's a couple of things that we can pick up on there. I think one of them is, yes, the trust issue, which is, rather than talking about, if you like, threats, we very much base our conversation around risk. What is your risk tolerance? What is your risk appetite? And simply for us, the involvement of vendors who are likely to be subject to extrajudicial directions from a foreign government is a risk which we don't feel we can accept. They'll conflict with our Australian law, and we felt it would risk failure by the carrier to adequately protect the 5G network that they'd built from unauthorized access or interference. And that was why I used the analogy of giving away the keys to the car. Because if you have a company which is building your 5G architecture, which is answerable to a foreign government, well, exactly, we're getting into a conversation around sovereignty. And essentially, it's well, what risks are you willing to accept? And and we're often, well, we always say, every government is quite capable of making their own sovereign decisions about which vendors they feel they are comfortable with. But we do encourage that any country makes an assessment, a risk assessment, based on the facts that they have. So, that's where we come from with our decision-making process. And I think it's also a matter of, everyone being clear-eyed about the risks of developing new telecommunications architecture now. Because as you rightly said, there's a lot of 5G architecture which has been stalled, and a lot of countries are still at a very early stage in terms of telecommunications uplift. The connectivity piece across the Indo-Pacific is still, there's a long journey to be traveled. And for many of our partners around the region, really they're just shifting from 2G, 3G networks into a 4G network. So sometimes this conversation might seem like a bridge too far in terms of thinking about risks. But certainly if you are currently investing in a modern 4G network, again, there needs to be an understanding of risk, because that 4G network can be upgraded to a 5G network with software upgrades. So therefore, even those decisions now have to be done with a mindset of what risk are you willing to accept in terms of the access that a foreign government may well have to your network if you allow certain vendors to build that network. And the other thing I would say is that actually, one thing that really pushed our decision was the fact that our telecommunications sector was looking for market certainty. They wanted assistance in making the right investment decisions for them. Now where we find ourselves is that we have now rapidly developed 5G networks. We've used other vendors, trusted vendors, and now we're in a really favorable position in terms of driving forward leadership in 5G innovation and everything else that comes as a consequence.
Right.
So it was a bold decision. It was a difficult decision. Yes, of course, there's pain involved in all these decisions, but it needs leadership to be thinking 5-10 years down the track rather than the instant sugar hit of cheaper providers.
No doubt about it. I think Australia displayed true courageous leadership in preventing Chinese apps. I'll come to Ms. Albrycht now. You mentioned that you are caught in this China-US binary, and there are sanctions that the US has placed, and therefore that is also impacting the decisions in EU. My question is simple. What if US turns around tomorrow and says it's withdrawing its ban? Will the EU strategy change?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question?
Suppose
I mean, not the entire one, but the two last sentences, because I have
yes, I
some.
will. Suppose the US withdraws its sanctions and says it withdraws its ban on Huawei and Chinese equipment. Will that influence the way EU decides its telecommunications network?
Well, I think that it is probably not possible that US will change its policy towards Huawei, but probably I should underline now that in Poland and in some other EU countries, there is a high dependence on Huawei equipment in the telecommunication sector. And this is a real problem. In fact, we are facing the possibility of national dependence on the single supplier, and this is something which we need to change despite the international politics around the company. In Poland, only 1 of 4 operators is free of Huawei equipment. Others are dependent from 40 to even 80%. So keeping this dependence and this lack of diversity is definitely not a wise strategy. Definitely this 5G anchoring in the Huawei 4G and LTE infrastructure should be probably diminished anyway by reaping and replace policy done while upgrading from 4G to 5G in core and RAN. It should be probably done within careful crafted timetable, and we should not let the lack of diversification happen again. So the answer to your question is that even if anything change in terms of the politics around the Huawei, we have our internal interest to be more diversified, to open our market for newcomers, also probably to look closer on open RAN architecture to make sure that the market will be more diversified.
Thank you. Mr. Mitra, since you're not going to be speaking on Huawei, you're not going to be commenting on other countries and so on, can I ask you a very Indian question, which is that is India ready for 5G in your opinion? We haven't even explored 4G properly. Do you think India needs to be in 5G?
Gautam, I think you have asked a very pertinent question. I strongly believe that India has to embark on 5G at the earliest. If you see today 5G, almost as a company ourselves, we have rolled out around 65 networks in all the 5 continents, even South America is now on. And we have more than 100 plus 5G networks which are operational. When I say operational, these are what we call commercial, where you have a commercial 5G device, you have a commercial radio, and the customer is actually paying for the 5G service. And as Ambassador mentioned, Australia was one of the first movers in this space. Now you have almost South Korea, Japan, US, many countries in Europe, even in Latin America, and in some countries even in Asia. 5G is more or less, it is not being seen purely as a communication technology. That's very essential to understand. And there is a huge interplay between 5G and your industrial component of the economy. So if you see countries which are very strong in manufacturing are actually integrating their 5G in the industrial, in the manufacturing space. Similarly, countries which are very strong on, say, logistics, transportation, who depend a lot on, say, shipping, they are modernizing their ports, airports, logistics systems. Similarly, countries like Australia, who are very strong in mining, are deploying a lot of 5G systems in the mining industry. So for India, it becomes essential that while the consumer play, will evolve, because consumer play will see a lot of, as we call the innovations, which will come from the garages. But here, a lot of industrial innovation has happened, and it's important for India to embark on that. And otherly, as an Indian, I also believe that see, this entire 5G is opening up a huge opportunity of what we call a digital transformation. People call it different names, Industry 4.0, some call it machine IoT and all. But basically, every large, small, medium enterprise is going to undergo a digital transformation. It is not just implementing a small IT system, but it is overhauling the entire. If it is in manufacturing, then manufacturing, banking, any industry that you may take, even agriculture, putting sensors on the ground. That offers a huge potential for Indian ITers, Indian startups to actually contribute.
Essentially, you are saying India is ready, and we'll take it at that because time is now running out, and
Yeah.
I'm being told to close. We hardly have 10 minutes left now. I'm going to come to Professor Kai with a question from Helen Robert, which is: will Chinese political decisions negatively impact its technology sector? This is in context of China's aggressive stance all around the world, around all its borders in the South China Sea, as I've discussed earlier in India. So, do you think that political decisions are negatively impacting the technological prowess of China?
Well, this is a good question and a hard one. I think that as a government, every country has its own political decision, just as the United States, EU made their decisions also based on some political considerations, and China does so. And I know that China and India has recently had some problems between us over the borders and other APPs, etc. Does it really affect China's technological development? In what direction? In a positive direction or in a negative direction? I would say both. If we look at the positive. First, let me look at the negative perspective. And we think we already see that a lot of controversies between China and other countries are there, and some Chinese companies now having problems coming into other countries' market. For example, the Belgian recently had a contract with Ericsson, etc. And this is, I think, for the market share and also for some kind of technology companies, this is a negative. But I would say that there's also positive there because, for example, when the United States banned some suppliers, some vendors from Huawei's supply chain, and Huawei is now devoted to developing their own core technology, and this probably will promote another kind of technology development. I'm not sure if I'm saying it correct or if you get it.
We've understood that basically that if the world bans Huawei, Huawei will work for itself, but it need not engage with the rest of the world. I mean, if that's what my understanding is. I'm going to move to Ms. Albrycht with a question from Tom Smith. Why should Chinese surveillance bother us more than American surveillance over the last 50 years?
Well, I will answer that question probably with the reference to the title of the panel. What may be missed in the 5G era from the EU and NATO perspective is the relations with not so much like-minded technology provider, and what can and should be enhanced in that situation, and definitely not missed, are relations with like-minded countries, including US, including our partners within NATO alliance. we need to work together on how we should implement not only 5G, but also other emerging and disruptive technologies, having in mind democratic values, having in mind the strong cooperation. We need to work together on how to tackle related problems, such as surveillance also, risks and threats together, and together maintain our technology edge. For sure, 5G definitely pushes us to rethink the way how we are going to deploy those disruptive technologies and how we understand their importance, because of 5G we are also living the era of being technologically complacent and unaware of the possibilities that technologies is giving us in terms of, for instance, surveillance. So we need to discuss it together. For sure, we are entering now an era where and when the technology goes hand in hand with geopolitics. And in terms of geopolitics, our friends are on the NATO and EU side, as well as in democratic countries around the world, the like-minded ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Last two questions I have for Professor for Ambassador Feakin. One is from Kevin. Countries that are going to decide on national interest. For many, that is low cost. Why should they not partner with China? And one more question for you. The Five Eyes and other countries have come to different technical conclusions about the security and privacy threats of Huawei hardware and software. How do you explain this? This is from Paul Cadario. So you have about 2 minutes, Ambassador Feakin. Then we
Great.
close.
Thank you, Kevin. And sorry, I didn't catch the last name of who asked the second question, but I'll see if I can answer.
Paul Cadario.
Thank you very much, Paul, as well. Look, I think there is one answer that could almost summarize the two of these, which is, these are decisions which are particular to each country that is involved in the decision-making process. So on the first, all of these decisions are sovereign decisions for a country to make. I would say if any country is making their decisions solely on a cost point, it's a false economy, because it will end up costing you a hell of a lot more down the line. In terms of the second question, pure and simply, everyone has different telecommunications architecture that they're working with. So therefore, everyone has slightly different considerations. Everyone has slightly different political systems. So therefore, it's not always going to be, this wonderfully smooth process that perhaps the outside world would believe, because we all just simply have very different situations that we're dealing with. Same for India, same for Australia, different dynamics that we're having to deal with there. So I think the main thing that I'll return to is that whilst all countries may have the temptation to go for the sugar hit of cheaper economic costs in the first instance, that will only come back to bite you in the end, whilst you're trying to mitigate the enormous security risk that you would be absorbing. But thanks very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Feakin. Trisha, give me 1 more minute. Mr. Mitra was raising his hand. He wanted to make a comment. You have 30 seconds, Mr. Mitra.
No, I was just unmuting. I was just checking the.
Okay, thank you. So you used 10 out of your 30 seconds. I'll use the balance. So thank you very much. I think, you know what, I wanted this panel to go on for a little longer, maybe an hour longer, because I think we were only beginning to get warmed up to the issues. But I suppose there is a discipline that we have to follow. And so thank you very much, everybody. This has given me a lot of learnings. Thank you.